Now I want you guys to have a 5% deer parcel out there, and a 5% deer parcel is a special deer parcel because out in the whitetail world and out in the deer hunting neighborhood, there are very, very few parcels that actually hold mature bucks during the daylight, that attract the focus of daylight, mature bucks. And for that, I believe that 5% of or less of all deer parcels are actually mature buck parcels. That's really the way it is. And there's a lot of reasons that happens. Obviously, a huge amount of pressure, poor hunting habitats, poor habitat designs. But I'm gonna go through 10 ways that I believe you can have a 5% parcel. I'm gonna try to go through these quick so they're not too long for you. But I've experienced 5% parcels going back into the late 80s, early 90s. I would say some by accident, just because I couldn't overpressure the lands I hunted. I lived an hour and 45 minutes away from most of the areas I hunted. Only hunted on the weekend, sometimes every weekend, and we would have a rotation of stands that were 14, 15, 16, 17 stands. We made some of our own, we collected them for Christmas. People say, well, I can't afford 10, 15 stands. Well, how about 8 Christmases in a row and birthdays? Maybe you can get those stands or do a little bit of extra work on the side. There's always a way to accumulate tree stands, and when you're buying quality like our family traditions, they last for a long time. Here are 10 ways that your parcel can become a 5% parcel and be the herd influencer in the neighborhood. Because let's face it, if you're not a 5% parcel and you're not attracting mature bucks to your land, you're not influencing anything, no matter what your QDM goals are, no matter what kind of standards you have for bucks. If you're not attracting them during the daylight, you're not really building anything, including a quality herd or a quality hunt. So number one, it all starts with that foundation. You have to have unpressured food. If you have unpressured food, meaning you're not spooking the deer off those food sources, those food plots, then you have that first ability to start and initially begin to start to attract deer to your parcel and actually become that 5% parcel. Now, if you have unpressured food, that's one thing. But if the neighbor has all the cover, or if you have big open hardwoods surrounding that food, then you're not going to be able to hold deer on your parcel. So you have to have unpressured cover adjacent to that food source. So those are the two first pieces. You have to have unpressured food, and then you have to have unpressured cover. So when it comes to number 3, you have your unpressured food, you have your unpressured cover, but number 3, it doesn't have to be perfect. Everyone looks at having, and I know so many people that have the perfect cover, the perfect food plot, but they have a terrible property because they've overreached on the level of perfection that they actually need and sacrificed other things that we're going to talk about in the next 7 steps after this. But so you just have to reach and attain adequacy. Think about it. A lot of times the best bucks are living in cover that's not perfect. They're feeding on afternoon food sources that are not perfect, but they're there because they're unpressured. So unpressured trumps perfection any single time. Always remember, you can never overcome poor or sloppy hunting efforts with great habitat, food, and cover. You're just never going to overcome sloppy. In fact, it makes it worse. An effective trail cam program and a trail cam setup is just so critical. And whether you're reading old sign, new sign, and you're looking at that sign that's popping up, a camera can tell you exactly what's going on at each tree stand. So it's not just there's a big buck off in the corner, he's coming in the middle of the night. Well, how does that relate to anything? It doesn't even relate to how you're creating a quality herd or a quality hunt. But if you have that unpressured food, you have adequate food sources, adequate cover, it's unpressured, and you place your cameras by your tree stands, then you're gonna know what bucks are moving by which tree stands, when to hunt, when they're in those areas. And don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't put tree stands by your tree stands. That means they're just doing it wrong. If they're 6 feet in the air, the profile's hidden, the tree's wider than the camera, you can always put a camera there and you're not gonna spook deer. You're gonna spook deer if it's infrared lighting, if you have those red bulbs, but if you have blackouts, low glow, like the Access Trail cameras that we use, then you're not gonna spook deer. It is such a blessing to be able to have those cameras at your tree stand locations. It can give you intel that is incredible nowadays. And you can say that that's too modern for hunting, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Then you can go by the old sign, you can go by tracks, you can go by fresh sign that just popped up. But bottom line is, you know when to hunt each one of those stands as they relate to unpressured food, adequate cover, and adequate food. One of the problems with, hunting land in general, people get to that thought that, well, I just love doing the improvements. I really don't care, hunting's second now. Well, that's really a shame because you bought the land to hunt. I mean, hunting really is a driving force. And if you have good habitat, you have a good herd, you're going to have a good hunt. So if you're working on just habitat and you don't have that good herd and you don't have that good hunt, something needs to change. You can't just resort back to, oh, this is awesome, I have great habitat and it's so much fun doing habitat work, but if you're not creating a good herd or a good hunt, why bother? There's plenty of land that can take care of the deer. The deer don't need to typically be taken care of. So it's so easy to over-improve deer habitat. You're trying to make improvements everywhere. The old school way of thinking, and still the current school way of thinking, a lot of times is taking every little piece of your hunting property, no matter if it's 10 acres or 1,000, and trying to do everything you can to improve it. And that, folks, that is just the wrong way to go about deer habitat improvement and wildlife habitat improvement in general. You have to be able to access your land without spooking deer. The more defined and concise your habitat improvements, the more they actually relate and complement each other, the more you can determine not only where deer are going to move and where they live and where they bed and where they feed and where they travel on your land, you can determine where they're not. And where they're not is often just as important as where they are, and that's why over improving your habitat outside of those lines of movement, outside of bedding to bedding, bedding to food sources, if you really have dead-end movements, a food source off to the side, a bedding area that doesn't relate to anything else and is on your access, whatever it might be, you're just setting yourself up for failure by over-improving and making random improvements on your land. So folks, there's a lot of stuff you can really waste your time on. There's a lot of really cool things online, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Google, articles, books, whatever it might be, that are huge time wasters. And I'm not going to go into great detail on these, but for example, you need to learn when you're making a habitat improvement, how does this affect my ability to build a herd, to have a good hunt, and to actually help the deer? And I'll give you a big example. A lot of burning projects in woods, they release a lot of herbaceous growth. You thicken the understory, but all that herbaceous growth is gone during the fall. As soon as the weeds die, as soon as the green dies, then there's nothing there. If there's nothing there, it's not helping you during the fall. It's not helping the deer during the critical times of the year, which is in the wintertime. The same could be said for hack and squirt projects, where you're trying to bring sunlight to the forest floor. You're killing trees. A lot of times those trees you're killing are the best wildlife trees: box elder, soft maple, aspen, whatever it might be. You're killing the wrong trees in favor of hardwoods. That's more of a schooled forestry approach, not a wildlife approach. There's a big difference between wildlife practices and money practices. You can blend the two together a little bit, but often at their best, they're extremely opposite. Fads of miscanthus grass, really cool screening. Might get to 12 to 15 feet tall, but could have conifers been planted for 20% the cost or 1/10 the cost and grow more height? Could have switchgrass been planted at 1/50th the cost? Only 10 minutes of work instead of 3 days of work to plant a 1/4 mile of miscanthus grass versus switchgrass. Miscanthus grass is one huge fad. Now, if you need height and you need screening under power lines, miscanthus grass is your planting. There's always a place for any of these improvements, whether it's hack and squirt, controlled burns, miscanthus grass. One of those there's really not much of a use for other than some distance screening, and shouldn't be even tried by most practitioners, is a high hinge cut. High hinge cuts are a waste of time. You're putting a high hinge cut up in the air. You're trying to make that deer canopy like you see on TV, like a trampoline. Deer don't need to, again, I'm going to say it 100 times more if you keep watching these videos for the next 10 years, if I'm blessed to be able to do this that long. But birds are not, or deer are not hiding from birds in plane. They need to hide from each other. They need side cover. That cover needs to be belly high to us, down to knee high. And when you're making that cover, it creates browse. And you don't want that browse to start at our head, because then the deer can't reach it. So you're ruining that timber. You're putting cover above the deer, you're putting food above the deer, and that's high hinge cuts are just one big fad. And I'll leave you with one when it concerns the bedding areas: cutting bedding logs and putting them in a bedding area. When you have high hinge cuts and you don't have side cover, guess what? You need some type of cover. So someone long ago thought, well, I'll cut some logs and put them in those bedding areas, gives it some side covers. But what a fad. It's one of those, you don't know what you're doing when you do these kind of things. And so I'm trying to keep you, the whole thing, if I thought bedding logs were great, high hinge cuts, controlled burns, hack and squirt, miscanthus grass, I would have been teaching it 10 years ago. I first saw miscanthus grass 12 or 13 years ago on a property. He's showing it to me because someone planted it for him, and we're both looking at it like, what does it do? You know, it was kind of a cool bedding area, but he could have planted switchgrass. In that case, it probably would have cost him 50 cents or $1 in that small location. But bottom line, don't get caught up in these fads and time wasters. Waste your resources, waste your money, And if you're wasting all that time in those things, you're probably ignoring some of these things coming up that you really need to pay more attention to if you're going to have a 5% parcel. Number 7, ignoring the fads, ignoring the perfection that people seek in bedding areas and food plots. Really what it boils down to, you're going to find a 5% parcel, even sometimes if you don't do the habitat work, because the lowest hole in the bucket of all of this, of creating a great herd, creating a great hunt, is hunting pressure, is how you hunt the land. Again, no amount of habitat work can erase poor hunting efforts. And if you focus on the hunting and applying that to everything you do, a high level of hunting strategy, you're always going to win out in the end if everything you do is slanted towards that hunting strategy. And that's the end I come from. You know, I hunted at a high level, multiple states, public land, small private land tracts since the mid 80s. And then I didn't develop my business until I was 35. It was 2005. So I'd been doing this for 20 years, doing things on my land for 10 years, hunting at a high level, many different states, all do it yourself, and then applied that knowledge to what I do with habitat. And if you do that, that'll get you on the right track. Number 8, part of that high-end hunting strategy, you have to be quiet getting in and out of the parcel. If deer can hear you 200 yards away, it doesn't matter if it's something clanking a rock when you're going through, if it's your step on crunchy leaves. If you just have to learn to slow down. If you have noisy stands, they can be the kiss of death. Climbing stands on small parcels, really the kiss of death. You have to be quiet getting up and down the tree, quiet gear, quiet clothing, quiet boots, the list goes on. I mean, obviously if a deer can hear you 200 yards away or a quarter mile away with an ATV, that is not a good thing. Again, the young bucks, does, they might not care, but certainly when it gets to an older age class of bucks, they do care, unless you're in the fantasy land states where there's not a lot of hunters. But you have to be quiet, moving on and off your property just like a predator. Number 9, this is critical. Once you have the adequate food, you have the adequate cover, you set it up so deer can move back and forth between that afternoon food source, between their bedding areas. They're moving through funnels that you dictate. You're not over improving the land. Once you have those stand locations that you can get in and out without spooking deer, really what you have to worry about most is making sure deer are not downwind of you on the stand. And this goes back to over improving your land. Making sure that you're blowing your scent into open hardwoods, off a cliff, into a waterway, into a rock face, into a big conifer stand where the deer aren't currently located because you don't have blizzard conditions or high snow conditions. Maybe even into a big switchgrass field where you know the deer aren't bedding there during the day because there's no food or browse for them in the middle of that big area. The bottom line is controlling your scent on stand is not using the latest gadget, gel, spray, whatever it might be, or contraption. Controlling your scent on stand is blowing it into a non-deer area. I know it's a novel approach, but that's the way it boils back to those hunting basics and how to hunt deer. And if you blow your scent into a non-deer area, you don't have to worry about it. And that goes back into whether you're defining your public land hunt by finding these conditions and funnels and making sure you have multiple stands and access routes and so you can blow your scent into a marsh or a wet area or into a non-deer area, or you're actually building it on your private land. That's your number 1 way to control scent is, of course, to not leave a scent signature when you're in and out. You have clean boots, you have clean clothes. We use a limit shield and spray down when we're going out into the woods and some type of elimination spray. But bottom line is when you're on stand, don't rely on anything to control your scent because you're going to fail more often than not. If you want more of 100% success, then just don't blow your scent towards deer while you're on your stand. And finally, you have your property, you have your hunt, you have your public land hunt and access all laid out where you're going to have your stands. You've based it on movements between unpressured food, unpressured bedding areas. You've put this entire picture together. You've made sure your scent's blown into a non-deer area when you're on stand. You've used cameras to let you know. You've used sign rub scrapes, the pop-up of rub scrapes. You've identified bucks that are coming onto the land at a certain time when you need to go hunt them. You've identified even core and non-core bucks. Bucks are there all the time, or bucks that only come during the rut, and when you actually go in and hunt for them. Number 10, I really encourage you to hunt by the weather. I have lots of weather hunting videos out there, how to hunt by the weather, how to hunt cold fronts. Look up Jeff Sturgis weather hunting formula, you'll find it on YouTube. My all-weather whitetail book is the last book I came out with in 2018, and that details how to use the weather, exactly how to hunt. The weather can provide you precision days to get in the woods. If you're using precision days to hunt, you're not overhunting your stands. No, you cannot shoot more deer by not sitting on the couch. You can actually shoot more deer when you're sitting on the couch because you're not overpressuring your stands, your land, your family, your career, everything else. You're simply using precision to go in on a well-crafted 5% parcel where you haven't overpressured the deer habitat, you haven't overpressured your sits, your tree stands out on public land, wherever it might be, and you're going in and you're experiencing that 5% hunt that 95% of the hunters in the area don't get to experience, because you're not only putting it all together correctly in your hunting definition of movement, unpressured definition, your adequate food sources, you've identified those movement with trail cameras or sign, but you're actually picking those 1 or 2 days during the week, maybe just 1 or 2 sits, maybe 10 sits over the course of a month, that give you the highest opportunity to actually harvest a mature buck when you go in the woods. Certainly, you can shoot a giant buck when there's hot weather and high winds and the conditions are terrible, but the odds are overwhelmingly in your favor if you actually use the weather and the weather forecast, the weather model, the weather algorithm that I use going forward. You can find that it'll bring you success. It's brought me success on my target bucks, close to 40 target bucks since the early 90s. I hunt by the weather. I hunt 7, 8, 9, 10 days. Out of 10 days, I don't hunt 1, 2, 3. You can put it all together this year. I want you to become a 5% parcel. I want to not waste time for you. I want your efforts to be well-directed, well-defined, and to give you a great chance of success going into this fall. Tell me about it. I want to hear that you're a 5% deer hunting parcel, and I hope this makes sense to you, because it can happen. You can get it done, and I want you to have that slim margin of success that most people in the neighborhood don't get to experience. And guess what? If you're having that hunt, you're going to have a great herd too, and I hope you enjoy the off season.